The astronomer sat hunched over his desk, the glow of 3 computer screens painting tired shadows under his eyes. Outside the thick glass of the new Puerto Rico observatory, built after the old Arecibo dish finally gave up, the jungle hummed with night sounds. Inside, it was just the low whir of machines and the occasional drip of his half-empty coffee cup. He'd been staring at radio static for hours. Just endless, meaningless noise from deep space. Another dead shift. Another night chasing ghosts. He rubbed his gritty eyes, thinking about the microwave popcorn waiting in his tiny on-site apartment. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe. Then he saw it. Not a flash, not a bang. Just a pattern. Like finding a straight line in a field of scribbles. Buried deep in the chaotic hiss coming from the direction of Proxima Centauri b, that rocky planet orbiting our closest star neighbor, was something regular. A pulse. Steady. Insistent. Too clean for space noise. His sleepy brain jolted awake. This isn't random. He leaned closer, heart starting a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. He ran the filters again. Checked the calibration. Pulled up the raw data stream. There it was. Clear as a bell in the static. A signal. Not just any signal. A message. He didn't shout. Didn't jump up. Just sat very still. The cold metal of the chair suddenly sharp against his back. His fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up the decoding software. It was slow, painstaking work. Like trying to read a book written in sand that keeps shifting. But the pattern held. It wasn't words, not at first. It was math. Pure, elegant, universal math. Prime numbers ticking by like a cosmic clock. Then geometry. Simple shapes unfolding in the data stream. Proof. Proof this wasn't lightning hitting a satellite. Or a glitch in the system. Proof someone, something, out there had built a machine powerful enough to shout across the gulf of space. And smart enough to speak the only language everyone might understand. Numbers. The first wave of disbelief crashed over him. Too big. Too impossible. He checked the timestamp. Checked the telescope alignment. Triple-checked the filters. It was all solid. The signal was real. He called in the night crew. Just 2 others. Bleary-eyed like him. No grand team. No fanfare. Just 3 ordinary people in a room smelling faintly of stale coffee and dust, staring at a screen, showing proof we weren't alone. One of them spilled her coffee. The other just kept muttering, "No way." Just no way. But the data didn't lie. They worked through the night, verifying, cross-checking, their exhaustion replaced by a buzzing, almost unreal energy. They were holding something immense. Something that changed everything dot by dawn. The math had led them deeper. Past the simple greetings. Into something heavier. Something that felt urgent. The numbers began to translate into concepts, into images formed in the mind, not on the screen. They saw graphs, terrifyingly familiar graphs. Rising lines showing heat, plummeting lines showing life in the oceans. Charts of air choked with invisible poison. It mirrored Earth's own crisis reports exactly. The same desperate climb in temperature, the same suffocation of the seas. It wasn't just a hello. It was a history. A warning dot, then came the words. Not English, not any human language, but the meaning formed directly in their understanding. Carried on the structure of the math itself. Simple. Devastating. We were like you. The astronomer felt a cold sweat break out on his neck, despite the room's chill. He read it again. And again. We reached for the stars while breaking our cradle. We thought the sky was endless, the oceans eternal. We were wrong. The cost is paid not by the guilty alone, but by the child unborn. Retribution is not a sword wielded by gods. It is the slow, certain turning of the wheel you broke. Entropy's law. Not vengeance, consequence. He read the next line, the one that made his stomach drop like a stone. You walk the same path. See the cracks in your world? They are the same cracks that swallowed ours. Cease, or join our silence. Silence. That was the word that echoed loudest. Not we will destroy you, but we tried to stop it and failed. Now we are gone. And you are next. They called it the Elder's Warning later in the frantic days that followed. But sitting there in the pale morning light, filtering through the observatory windows, listening to the jungle wake up outside, it didn't feel like a title. It felt like a death sentence delivered with heartbreaking calm. 12,000 years old, the signal's timestamp suggested. 12,000 years ago, they had stood where humanity stood now, blind to the edge they were rushing towards, until it was too late. And they had sent this message. Not a plea for help, but a desperate, final shout into the dark. Don't make our mistake. The astronomer thought about the news feeds he skimmed during coffee breaks, the arguments about real science, the politicians shrugging off another record-breaking heat wave, the slow-motion disaster of the dying coral reefs barely making the headlines. He thought about the new oil rigs being built, the forest still falling, the sheer staggering normalcy of it all, while this truth sat blinking on his screen. The warning wasn't dramatic. It didn't promise fire from the sky. It simply stated the physics. Break the system badly enough, and the system breaks you. No second chances. No cosmic reset button. Just silence. He looked at his colleagues. One was pale, staring at her hands like they didn't belong to her. The other had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking, not crying, but overwhelmed. The weight of it pressed down, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. This was a mirror held up to humanity, showing not just what we were doing to the planet, but the inevitable end of that path. A path walked before. A path that ended in silence. He finally stood up, legs stiff. He walked to the window, looking out at the green, vibrant, fragile world. The same world the elder civilization had destroyed. The same world humanity was now destroying. The signal hadn't come with instructions or saviors or magic solutions. Just the cold, hard truth of cause and effect. A truth older than human history. A truth shouted across 12 millennia of dead space, landing on a planet still too busy arguing to truly listen. He touched the cool glass. Below, the ordinary routines of the observatory were starting. Technicians arriving, birds calling, life going on, blissfully unaware that the most important message in human history had just been received. The astronomer felt a strange mix of despair and a fierce, burning hope. They knew. They tried to tell someone, anyone, before the lights went out. Now it was humanity's turn. Would they hear it? Would they believe it? Or would they, too, become just another whisper lost in the static, a silent warning for some future civilization rushing blindly towards its own edge? He turned back to the screen, the simple, devastating words glowing softly. Cease, or join our silence. The coffee was cold. The popcorn was forgotten. The real work, the terrifying, crucial work, had just begun. And the clock, he knew with a chilling certainty, was already ticking down. What have we done? The question hung in the quiet room, heavy as stone. What have we all done? The silence of the galaxy outside the window suddenly felt less like emptiness, and more like a held breath, waiting, watching, knowing how this story ends. The astronomer barely slept after that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words floating in the dark. Cease, or join our silence. He carried the weight of it like a stone in his chest as he walked into the observatory the next morning. The usual sounds, the hum of machines, the chatter of colleagues, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, all felt strangely distant, like he was watching life through thick glass. The world hadn't changed. People were still rushing to meetings, complaining about traffic, checking their phones. But he knew something fundamental had cracked open. News of the signal exploded online before sunrise. Not the careful, verified science he and his team had prepared, but wild, messy fragments. Grainy screenshots of the data stream. Clickbait headlines screaming aliens warn yous. Alongside blurry UFO photos from 1992. Social media lit up like a fireworks display. Some cheering, some laughing, most just confused. Memes popped up instantly. A cartoon Earth ignoring a tiny alien holding a stop sign. Captioned, "Humanity when the galaxy says chill." The astronomer felt a sick twist in his gut. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't respect for a dying civilization's final message. This was noise. The same noise that had drowned out every urgent warning about the planet for decades. Then came the official channels. Phones rang nonstop. Important people wanted to talk. Government officials, scientists from big labs, even a man who claimed to be a cosmic translator demanded access. The pressure was immense. The team worked around the clock, verifying the signal's origin. The age, confirmed, 12,000 years old. The terrifying accuracy of the environmental data it contained. It matched Earth's current crisis point for point. The melting ice, the choking oceans, the feverish heat. It wasn't a prediction. It was a reflection. This is what happens when you break your world. A week later, they were flown to Geneva. Not for a quiet scientific discussion, but for a hastily called emergency session at the United Nations. The astronomer, still in his slightly rumpled field shirt, felt wildly out of place among the sharp suits and polished diplomats. The grand hall buzzed with tension. Cameras flashed. Delegates whispered urgently. He sat quietly, clutching a simple USB drive holding the core evidence, the math, the environmental parallels, the translated warning. The presentations began. Scientists stood up, pointing to charts showing Earth's CO2 levels mirroring the Callan's fatal spike. They showed satellite images of dying coral reefs alongside the Callan's ancient data on oceanic collapse. The proof was cold, hard, and undeniable. The astronomer watched faces. Some delegates looked pale, stunned. A few nodded slowly, eyes wide with dawning horror. But many others, their expressions hardened, shoulders squared, eyes darted to colleagues. The denial kicked in, fast and familiar. First, it was the economic argument. A representative from a major oil-producing nation stood, voice calm but firm. "This signal, while fascinating," he began, "is unverifiable. We have no way to confirm its true origin or intent. Could it be a sophisticated hoax? A natural phenomenon misinterpreted? Investing billions in panic based on one signal, while ignoring the real immediate needs of our people for energy and jobs. That would be reckless." He didn't mention the matching climate data. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. This is a threat to business. Ignore a dot, then came the religious angle. A delegate from a powerful faith-based bloc rose. His voice was gentle but unwavering. "We believe in a creator who holds the future of humanity in his hands, not in the warnings of ancient, possibly mythical beings lost in the stars. This signal may be a test of our faith, a distraction from the true path. Our duty is to trust in divine providence, not cosmic scare tactics." He spoke of hope and faith, carefully avoiding the hard science laid out before him. For his people, the message wasn't a warning. It was a challenge to their deepest beliefs. The scientists felt a familiar frustration rise. It was exactly like the early days of climate science denial. The same tactics. Attack the messenger. Question the data. Frame action as economic suicide. appeal to faith or national pride. The Kalen weren't gods. They were a mirror, but people only wanted to see what they chose to see. He was called to speak. His hands were clammy as he stepped to the podium. The lights were hot. He looked out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, most guarded, a few openly skeptical. He didn't use big words. He kept it simple, like explaining to a friend over coffee. 12,000 years ago, he began, his voice surprisingly steady. Another civilization stood where we stand now. They looked at their warming world, their dying seas, and they knew. They saw the cracks. They sent this message not to scare us, but because they failed. They tried to stop it, and couldn't. Now they're silent. Just gone. He paused, letting it sink in. The graphs we showed? The rising heat? The suffocating oceans? That's us right now. That's us right now. We're not heading for the cliff they went over. We're already teetering on the edge. The Kalen data isn't a prediction. It's a photograph. Our photograph. He saw a few nods. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. But then the questions started. Doctor, they didn't use his name, just the astronomer. A sharp voice cut in. If this is so urgent, why haven't we heard anything else? No follow-up signal? No other civilizations reaching out? Seems suspiciously convenient for those pushing radical environmental policies. Another voice. Isn't it possible this signal is simply a natural cosmic event, misinterpreted due to wishful thinking? We've had false alarms before. The astronomer took a breath. The silence is the point, he said quietly. Think about it. If every civilization that ignored this warning vanished quietly, who's left to send the next signal? The galaxy isn't ignoring us. It's silent because civilizations that hit this point stopped talking forever. The Kalen were the exception. They sent one last message before the lights went out. We're lucky we caught it. But the silence after? That's the rule. He saw the doubt harden on faces. It was too big, too dark. Easier to believe it was a trick or a mistake than to face the terrifying simplicity of the truth. We are doing exactly what doomed them. And the consequence isn't punishment from above. It's the natural result of breaking the only home we have. The debate raged for days. Scientists presented more evidence. Lobbyists presented counter-reports funded by industries with everything to lose. Social media exploded with hashtag alien hoax and hashtag KELEN truth. People argued in grocery store lines, at family dinners, online. Some were terrified into action, planting trees, cutting waste. Others doubled down, convinced it was a globalist plot to control them. The astronomer watched it all with a heavy heart. The message was clear. The evidence was solid. But the human response? Messy, scared, divided. Exactly as the Kalen must have feared. Finally, the UN vote. A resolution. Not to act, not to change course immediately, but merely to study it further. To form committees. To monitor the situation. It passed, but it felt like ashes in his mouth. A non-binding agreement to talk more while the planet kept heating. The ice kept melting. The oceans kept choking. The perfect excuse was now official. Without more proof, without other aliens confirming, we can't risk real change. Leaving Geneva, the astronomer stood on the steps of the UN building. Rain fell cold and steady. He looked up at the gray sky, then out at the city, the cars honking. The people hurrying under umbrellas, the smoke rising from a distant factory stack. Life, bustling on, oblivious. The Kalen's desperate cry across 12,000 years of darkness had landed, and been neatly filed away as unverifiable. The galaxy hadn't ignored humanity. Humanity had ignored the galaxy, ignored the warning, ignored the mirror. He thought of the farmer back home, worried about his failing crops but needing to plant something to feed his family next season. He thought of the factory worker who couldn't afford to lose his job, even if the smokestacks were part of the problem. He thought of the politicians terrified of losing elections if they demanded real sacrifice. The reasons for denial weren't evil. They were human, scared, short-sighted, trapped in the now. The astronomer pulled his thin jacket tighter against the rain. The stone in his chest felt heavier than ever. The warning had been heard, but had it been listened to? The silence of the stars above offered no answer. Only the steady drumming of rain on the city below, washing the streets clean for another day of business as usual. The clock was ticking, and humanity, it seemed, was still fast asleep. He walked into the wet street, just another person in the crowd, carrying a truth no one wanted to face. The real retribution, he realized with a chill, wasn't coming from the stars. It was already here, in the refusal to see, in the choice to do nothing while the cracks kept spreading. The galaxy hadn't ignored them. They were ignoring themselves. And the silence that followed wouldn't be empty space. It would be the sound of a world holding its breath, until it couldn't breathe at all. The astronomer didn't sleep much anymore. Nights were spent hunched over his laptop, the blue glow the only light in his small apartment, tracking numbers that felt like a countdown. The UN's further study had gone nowhere. Committees met, argued, and disbanded. Meanwhile, the real world kept moving, but differently now. Like a ship that had hit an invisible reef, still sailing on the surface, but with water silently rising in the hull. He could feel it. Everyone could, if they weren't busy pretending not to dot it, started subtly. Too subtly for most to notice right away. The Amazon, that vast green lung of the planet, began to cough. Not in fire this time, but in quiet, suffocating silence. Farmers deep in the jungle, people who'd lived on the same patch of dirt for generations, called the local radio stations, their voices crackling with confusion. The trees. They're just stopping, one man said, his words thick with disbelief. Not dying fast. Just not growing. Like the earth forgot how. Satellite images confirmed it. The vibrant living green was fading, turning a sickly, dusty brown in huge patches. Scientists called it D-back, the slow, unstoppable collapse of a forest ecosystem. The astronomer pulled up the Kalen data on his screen. The graphs matched exactly, point for point. The same silent suffocation happening 12,000 years ago. The same point where their civilization lost its chance to turn back. He sent the comparison to every major news outlet. Most ignored it. One ran it buried deep in their science section, under a headline about celebrity gossip. The world was too busy arguing online about whether the signal was real to see the proof unfolding in real time. Right outside their windows, then came the oceans. Not tsunamis or monsters, but something smaller, deadlier. A fisherman out near the Pacific garbage patch, a man who'd spent 40 years hauling nets, brought his catch home one evening. Instead of silver flashes of tuna, his nets were heavy with a thick gray slime. Microscopic plastic, tangled with the ghostly remains of plankton. He scooped a handful, letting it drip through his calloused fingers. His face grayer than the sludge. Plankton, the tiny plants that make the air we breathe. That feed the smallest fish. That feed the big fish. That feed us. Without them, the ocean dies. The food chain snaps. The astronomer saw the video of the fisherman go viral for a day. People called him Plastic Man, made jokes. Few connected it to the Kellen's chilling phrase, oceanic suffocation. Fewer still remembered the signal had shown this exact moment in their own collapse. The astronomer tried explaining it on a local radio show. The host cut him off. So you're saying aliens caused the plastic? Sounds like conspiracy theory to me. He hung up, the familiar stone of helplessness settling back into his chest. It wasn't aliens. It was us. Always had been. The worst part was the denial. It didn't come from snarling villains. It came from ordinary people, scared and tired. At the grocery store, an older woman pushed her cart past a display of wilted lettuce. "Prices are insane," she muttered to no one. When someone mentioned the drought-killing farms, she snapped. "That signal nonsense? Forget it. My grandkids need food on the table now, not space ghost stories." She wasn't evil. She was hungry. She was worried. And the signal, the warning, felt too big, too distant, while the empty fridge felt very real. The astronomer understood. He was hungry sometimes too. But he also saw the bigger picture. The empty fridge was the warning. The connection was there, screaming at them, but fear and the need for now drowned it out. Then, the methane hit. Not with a bang, but a smell. In the far north, where the ground used to stay frozen solid year-round, the earth began to breathe. Scientists working on the thawing permafrost reported a sharp, sour stench in the air. Methane, a greenhouse gas far more potent than CO2, the frozen soil, holding ancient decay, was rotting in the warmer air. The numbers came in, 1.2 gigatons released in 18 months. The astronomer stared at the figure. He didn't need to check the Kalen data this time. He knew it by heart. Exactly, their point of no return. The moment when their climate runaway became unstoppable. The moment when cooling things down became impossible, no matter what they did. He felt sick. This wasn't a future threat. This was the engine of disaster shifting into high gear right now. He called a press conference. Stood in front of a few tired reporters and a couple of camera phones. "This isn't about aliens anymore," he said, his voice rough. "It's about physics. It's about the air we breathe and the ground we stand on. The Kalen didn't cause this. We did. And we just crossed the line they warned us about. The line where stopping the damage gets 10 times harder. 100 times harder. Maybe impossible." He showed the methane graph, the Kalen curves superimposed. They matched like twins. One reporter yawned. Another asked, "But if aliens sent the warning, why aren't they helping? Seems kind of pointless, right?" The astronomer just shook his head, the exhaustion bone deep. "They are helping. They sent the only help they could, the truth, the rest. The rest was always up to us." The backlash was instant. Conspiracy forums exploded. "See? He admits it's not aliens. It's a hoax to scare us into giving up burgers." Fossil fuel lobbyists release slick videos. Real solutions for real people. Keep driving, keep living. Politicians gave speeches about energy independence and not letting fear cripple progress. The astronomer watched it on a tiny screen in a coffee shop, stirring cold dregs in his cup. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, belching black smoke. A teenager scrolled through memes about Kalen panic on her phone. Life rushed on, loud and messy and utterly, terrifyingly normal. The cracks in the world were widening. The failing crops, the strange new storms, the silent forests, but they were just background noise now. Part of the daily grind. People adapted. They bought air filters. They paid more for food. They complained about the heat. But the cause, the deep, terrifying truth that they were repeating a fatal mistake, that got buried under the weight of getting through today. One rainy afternoon, the astronomer got an email. Not from a scientist or a journalist. From a high school teacher in a coastal town. Attached were shaky phone videos. Kids in yellow raincoats, standing on what used to be a playground. Now, the sea lapped at the swings. Salt water stained the brick walls of the school up to the second-floor windows. The teacher's note was short. They're asking questions. Hard ones. about why we didn't stop it. What do I tell them? He stared at the pictures. The innocence in the kids' faces, the confusion. He thought of the Kalen message. The cost is paid not by the guilty alone, but by the child unborn. He hadn't understood it fully before. Now he did. The retribution wasn't lightning from the sky. It was this: children inheriting a broken world because the adults were too scared, too busy, too divided to fix it while they still could. He sat at his desk long after dark. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked window. He pulled up the Kalen data one last time. Not the warnings. The end. The final fragmented signal they'd sent. We tried. Now you know retribution is self-made. Remember us. He finally grasped it. The galaxy hadn't ignored humanity. Humanity had ignored itself. Ignored the warnings written in melting ice and choking seas. Ignored the mirror held up by a dead civilization. The silence wasn't judgment from the stars. It was the echo of their own choices. The retribution wasn't coming. It was here. In the salt water on the playground. In the plastic in the fisherman's net. In the sour smell of thawing earth. It was the slow, grinding consequence of a million small choices to look away, to wait, to hope someone else would fix it. He closed the laptop. The room was dark, except for the streetlight glow. Outside, a car horn blared, someone late for work, frustrated by traffic. The ordinary sound of a world still spinning, still rushing forward, blind to the edge. The astronomer didn't feel despair anymore. Just a deep, quiet sorrow and a fierce, burning question that wouldn't leave him. How do you wake up a planet that's chosen to stay asleep? He picked up his cold coffee cup. The real fight wasn't against aliens or even the climate. It was against the human heart's stubborn refusal to see the cliff until it's too late to stop. And that fight, he knew, staring into the empty cup, was the hardest one of all. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was already chiming, and humanity was still hitting snooze. The breadline started in June, not in some far-off war zone, but right here. First, there was a few tired-looking people waiting outside the big grocery store downtown, clutching coupons that suddenly didn't cover half the cost. Then it was dozens, then hundreds. The astronomer stood at the back of one, holding a thin paper bag that felt lighter than air. Inside, 2 stale rolls and a small block of cheese. His stomach growled, a constant companion now. It wasn't famine, not yet. But the wheat fields? Gone. Blasted by heat and strange, relentless drought that turned soil to dust overnight. Corn? Same story. Across half the planet, the breadbaskets had turned barren. The news called it unprecedented weather patterns. The astronomer called it by its real name, the Kalen's Great Filter Phase, the point where feeding everyone became impossible. He watched a young mother ahead of him, her arms wrapped tight around a small child, who stared blankly at the empty shelves visible through the store window. The mother's hand shook as she counted coins. The astronomer slipped an extra bill into her hand when the cashier wasn't looking. She didn't thank him, just nodded, her eyes hollow. The silence between them spoke volumes. We knew this was coming. Why didn't we stop it? The heat came next. Not just hot days, but a suffocating, sticky blanket that never lifted, even at night. Air conditioners whined and died under the strain. Cities that never needed them before, places like Seattle, London, even parts of Canada, choked. Hospitals overflowed. Old people, the ones living alone in apartments without windows that opened, were found too late. The astronomer walked past a park where people slept on benches under thin sheets, trying to catch a breeze that didn't come. He remembered the Kalen data, the exact temperature spike that had made their cities uninhabitable. It wasn't a prediction anymore. It was the weather report. Someone had spray-painted on a hot, buckling sidewalk. The elder was right. Below it, someone else had scrawled, "Too late to cry." The astronomer kicked at a pebble. Too late, or just too hard to face while there was still time. Then the water rose. Not with a crashing wave, but slowly, insidiously, like a thief in the night. He saw it first on the news, pictures of Miami. Not the dramatic floods of old hurricane movies, but something quieter, more final. Salt water bubbling up through storm drains in the middle of the day. Seawater pooling in underground parking garages. The fancy cars sat submerged, windows fogged, looking like drowned beetles. Officials called it nuisance flooding and talked about long-term resilience plans. But the astronomer knew better. He'd seen the Kalen's coastal abandonment charts, the slow, inevitable creep as ice caps vanished. This wasn't a nuisance. This was the beginning of the end for entire cities. He drove down to the coast one gray afternoon. Not Miami, but a smaller town he used to visit for quiet weekends. The main street was empty. Plywood covered the shops. A single sad "for sale" sign hung crookedly on a realtor's office, the paper bleached and torn by the salt wind. He stood on the old wooden pier, looking out at the water. It lapped gently at the pilings, higher than he'd ever seen it. A few gulls cried overhead. It felt peaceful, deadly peaceful, like the calm before the lights go out. He thought of the UN meeting, the suits dismissing the warning. Business as usual, they'd called it. Well, business was finished here. The only thing usual now was the rising tide. One sweltering night, hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of a battery-powered lamp. The power grid was failing more often. He saw it. A notification pinged, a weak, fragmented signal, barely clinging to existence. Origin, Proxima Centauri b, the Kalen's home. His heart hammered against his ribs. They're still there? They made it? Hope, sharp and sudden, flared. He scrambled to decode it, fingers fumbling. But the signal was faint, broken, like a radio station fading out. The words formed slowly, painfully in his mind. We tried. Silence. You see now. Retribution is self-made, not vengeance. Consequence. Remember us. Then static. Nothing. Just the hum of his dying laptop fan. He sat back, the hope collapsing like a punctured balloon. Not help, not a solution. Just confirmation. A final whisper from the grave. We tried. You saw the cliff. You kept walking. This is what happens. The retribution they spoke of wasn't punishment from angry gods or vengeful aliens. It was the simple, brutal physics of a system pushed too far. Break the world's balance, and the world breaks you back. No malice, just cause and effect. The stone in his chest, carried since that first night in the observatory, turned to lead. He'd understood the words before, intellectually. Now, he felt them. In the empty bread bag. In the sweat trickling down his neck. In the image of that flooded street. The consequence wasn't coming. It was here. It was the air they breathed, the water they couldn't drink, the ground that was no longer safe to stand on. He stepped outside into the thick, wet heat. The city was dark, another rolling blackout. Only the emergency lights on distant buildings glowed like dull red eyes. People milled in the streets, restless, trying to catch a breeze that didn't exist. Someone played a mournful tune on a guitar. A baby cried. The astronomer looked up. The sky, usually washed out by city lights, was startlingly clear. Millions of stars glittered, cold and indifferent. No ships, no saviors. Just the vast, ancient silence of space. And suddenly, he understood the real meaning of the galaxy's silence. It wasn't that they were ignoring humanity. It was that no one was left to hear. Every civilization that reached this point, that saw the cracks but chose to keep drilling, keep burning, keep arguing while the house burned, vanished quietly. They sent one last message into the dark, hoping someone would listen. Then, silence. The galaxy wasn't silent because it didn't care. It was silent because civilizations that ignored the Elder's warning always went silent. Forever. The Kalen weren't special. They were just the latest in a long, sad line of failures. And humanity was about to join them. The silence wasn't judgment. It was the echo of a million dead worlds, all whispering the same lesson. We broke our cradle. Now we are gone. Don't do the same. A commotion broke his thoughts. Down the street, near the old community center turned emergency shelter, voices rose, sharp, angry. They moved closer, staying in the shadows. A group of men in dusty work clothes faced off against a line of police in heavy gear. The police held up stop signs. The men held empty water jugs and signs that read, "Nitrogen monoxide water equals nitrogen monoxide peace." The tension crackled like live wires. The astronomer saw the fear in the police eyes, the desperation in the men's faces. It wasn't about aliens or signals. It was about clean water right now. The basic, brutal need to survive the next hour. He remembered the fisherman with the plastic slime nets, the mother counting coins for bread. This was it. The unraveling. Not with a bang, but with thirst, hunger, and the slow, grinding pressure of a world coming apart at the seams because its people couldn't or wouldn't see the edge until they were already falling. He turned away, walking slowly back towards his dark apartment. The guitar player had stopped. The baby had quieted. The only sound was the low thrum of generators trying to keep the lights on a little longer. He passed a boarded-up storefront. On the plywood, someone had written in shaky chalk, "When the warning came, we chose not to believe." Below it, another hand had added, "Sorry, kids." The astronomer stopped, put his hand flat against the rough wood, felt the heat of the day still radiating from it. He thought of the high school teacher's email, the pictures of salt water on the playground. The cost is paid not by the guilty alone, but by the child unborn. The Kalen knew. They'd lived it. And humanity, with all its cleverness and noise and denial, had walked the same path anyway. The retribution wasn't cosmic. It was human. It was the sum of a billion small choices to ignore the whisper in the static, to prioritize today's comfort over tomorrow's survival, to believe the problem was someone else's to fix. He reached his building. The stairs were dark. He climbed slowly, each step heavy. On the landing, an elderly neighbor sat on a folding chair, fanning herself with a magazine. She looked up, her face lined with exhaustion. "Hot nights," she said, her voice raspy. "Heard the waters shut off again past Elm Street. Like living in a dream. A bad one." She shook her head, staring out at the dark street. "Funny thing? I keep thinking, if only someone had listened. You know?" The astronomer nodded, unable to speak. He unlocked his door. Inside, the laptop screen glowed faintly, still showing the decoded fragments of the final signal. "Remember us." He sat down. Not to work, just to sit in the quiet dark, listening to the city breathe its last normal breaths. The galaxy hadn't ignored them. They'd ignored the only warning that mattered, the one written in their own actions, echoed across the stars by a dead civilization begging them to stop. The silence outside wasn't empty. It was full of the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting for the moment it could no longer hold on. And the astronomer knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that moment was now. The retribution wasn't coming from the stars. It was already here, in the empty water jugs, the flooded streets, the hollow eyes of the hungry. It was the sound of the door clicking shut behind them, as the last light went out. The old man's hand shook as he lifted the watering can. Not from cold. The geothermal greenhouse in Reykjavik hummed with a steady, comforting warmth, but from the simple weight of the thing. 10 years. 10 years since that first night in Puerto Rico, when the static turned into a warning. 10 years since the world began its slow, grinding stumble off the edge. Outside the thick, steamy glass, Iceland's winter wind howled, but in here, life stubbornly clung on. Rows of leafy greens, potato plants, even a few struggling tomato vines reached for the artificial suns overhead. This small bubble of warmth and green was all that remained of normal for most people now. He moved slowly down the aisle, the damp earth smell filling his nose, the familiar ache in his knees a constant companion. A group of kids, maybe 8 or 9 of them, were carefully tending seedlings under the watchful eye of a young woman who traded her engineering degree for dirt under her nails. One boy, his face smudged with soil, looked up. "Hey, the spinach is bigger," he called out, pointing with a muddy finger. The old man smiled, a real one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse and the dry air. "That means we eat tomorrow." It was the only math that mattered now. Growth equals survival. Later, as the kids gathered on woven mats for their daily lesson, the old man sat among them, his back against a warm pipe. He wasn't a teacher, not really. Just someone who remembered the before times, who carried the weight of the signal like a stone in his pocket. Today, he traced lines in the dirt floor with a stick. "See this?" he asked, drawing a simple curve. This is how the Kalan measured their world getting sick. Like a fever. He drew another line, steeper, sharper. This is how they measured it. Exactly the same. He paused, watching the kids' faces. Not scared, just curious, like he was telling a story about dinosaurs. They saw the fever. They knew it would kill them. They tried to stop it, but they were too late. They sent a message. Just one, across the stars. To warn anyone who might be listening. He met the eyes of a quiet girl with braids. Like shouting into a dark forest, hoping someone else is lost too. Why didn't they fix it? A boy asked, fiddling with a piece of string. The old man sighed. It was the question he'd asked himself 1,000,000 times. They were busy, he said simply. Busy arguing. Busy making things, buying things, fighting over who had more. Busy thinking the problem was too big or someone else's job. Busy believing the fever would just go away. He looked out at the fragile green life surrounding them. They forgot the forest was burning while they argued about the bucket. A comfortable silence fell, filled only by the drip of condensation and the soft hum of the geothermal pumps. Someone offered him a chunk of dense, dark bread, precious calories. He took it, the rough texture familiar. This was the world now, small, shared, focused on the next meal, the next day. Half the people he'd known were gone. Not in explosions, but in the slow, grinding way of hunger, thirst, and sickness that followed the collapse. Cities drowned or baked. Farms turned to dust. The noise of the old world, the endless chatter, the arguments about the signal, the denial had finally, blessedly, stopped. There was only the work of staying alive. Then, the comes box crackled. It wasn't loud. Just a faint, insistent buzz from the corner of the greenhouse, where a jury-rigged radio sat powered by a small wind turbine outside. Everyone froze. Signals were rare now. Mostly just static or the desperate, fading calls from other scattered refuges. The young woman who managed the radio scrambled over, her face tense. She adjusted dials, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. The old man felt his heart thud against his ribs. Not another warning. Please, not another warning we can't heed. The voice that came through was weak, strained, barely cutting through the static. It wasn't Kalen. It was human. American, maybe. Young. Terrified. Anybody. Mars Colony Alpha. Life support failing. Oxygen scrubbers offline. Radiation levels critical. Children, please, anyone. We have no power left to call Earth. If you hear this, the voice broke into a cough, then a choked sob. Just tell them. Tell Earth. We tried. We really tried. The transmission dissolved into a hiss of static, then silence. The greenhouse was utterly still. The kids looked up, confused. The young woman slowly turned off the receiver, her face pale. Mars. People had actually made it there. And now they were dying, alone, calling for help that would never come. The old man closed his eyes. The irony was a physical pain. Humanity had finally reached for the stars, just as the Kalem warned. But they'd done it while their cradle, Earth, was already breaking. They'd carried the same sickness with them, the same blindness, the same refusal to fix the home they had before chasing new ones. The retribution wasn't cosmic. It was the echo of their own choices, following them even to Mars. He stood up, ignoring the protest in his knees. He walked to the back of the greenhouse, where an old solar-charged laptop sat on a crate. It was the only link left to the wider broken world. He powered it on, the screen's glow harsh in the dim light. His fingers, stiff and slow, began to type. Not a plea for help. Not a scientific report. Just words. Simple words, for whoever might find them someday, if anyone ever did. He wrote about the signal. Not as aliens, but as neighbors. Neighbors who had walked the same path, seen the same cracks, and fallen. He wrote about the math matching the melting ice, the choking oceans. He wrote about the bread lines, the rising water, the silence after the final message. He wrote about the kids in the greenhouse, learning to grow food because no one shipped it anymore. He wrote the core truth, the one that had taken him 10 years to fully understand, the one the Kaon had screamed into the void. They weren't gods. They were us, just U.S., 12,000 years ago. They saw the cliff. They didn't stop. We saw the cliff. We didn't stop. Retribution isn't punishment from the sky. It's the ground giving way because you kept digging. The galaxy didn't ignore us. We ignored the warning written in our own hands. We chose the noise of today over the silence of tomorrow. He paused, looking at the kids. They were back to tending the spinach, the urgency of the Mars call already fading into the rhythm of survival. He added one last line, his fingers heavy on the keys. We heard the elder. We chose not to believe. Tell the next civilization, when the warning comes, act. Don't wait. Don't argue. Just act. He saved the file. Labeled it plainly, for who comes after. He connected the laptop to the radio transmitter, the same one that had just carried the dying plea from Mars. He set it to broadcast the message on all known emergency frequencies, weak as it was, into the silent sky. A final echo. A message in a bottle tossed into an empty ocean dot as the transmission began. A soft, electronic chirp replacing the static. The old man sat back. He watched the kids. One was showing another how to gently pinch off a dead leaf. Another was carefully measuring water for the seedlings. Life, stubborn and small, pushing forward. The greenhouse was warm. The air smelled of earth and growing things. For a moment, the crushing weight lifted. This was the retribution, yes, the broken world they'd made. But this quiet act of tending life in the ruins, this was the only answer left. The transmission finished with a soft beep. The screen went dark. He reached over and flipped the main power switch on the transmitter. Off. The gentle hum of the radio died. The only sounds were the wind outside, the drip of water, the soft voices of the children working. He leaned his head back against the warm pipe, closing his eyes. The galaxy remained silent. No ships appeared. No saviors descended. Just the vast, ancient quiet of space, holding the echoes of countless failures, including theirs. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of lessons shouted into the dark, waiting for ears willing to hear. He hoped with a fragile, fading hope that someone, someday, would listen. He took a slow breath of the warm, green air. The work here wasn't done. There were seedlings to water, tomorrow's meal to grow. He opened his eyes, picked up the watering can again, and shuffled slowly down the aisle. The retribution had come. Now, all that was left was to tend the embers and hope the next spark caught. The silence wasn't the end. It was just the space between breaths, waiting for the next voice to rise.